and like, okay, we are clearly doing something right if it's getting even a remote pushback, because it's causing a conversation, it's stirring up a dialogue, it's getting people to be like, wait a second, what else don't we know? If this was happening for so long, and it's also question the way that people are reacting to it. Hi, I'm Gabe.
And I'm Kat.
And we're the Ghouls Next Door.
The Ghouls Next Door.
We're a media analysis podcast from a horror lens where we explore the real-life historical reasons behind our cinematic fears. And we're talking about a really serious film today, which we do occasionally. Is a little different from what we talked about with the horror crowd, where we're just talking about horror. We're talking about this is that second part of our podcast that people tend to forget about, is the real life historical impact that is happening right outside that influences horror. And so as part of the Philadelphia Latino Film Festival, we're talking with Christen Marquez about Belly of the Beast, which is a documentary about forced sterilization in California, in a California prison, and about a spunky lawyer and a woman who has endured this, coming together to try to change it or to inform people on what is happening. And so Christen Marquez is the producer of Belly of the Beast and answers some questions for us. Be sure to check out the documentary if you haven't already, as part of the Latino Film Festival, and check out their website for resources to follow along as we are still working to make changes and fix this issue.
We have Christen Marquez, producer of Belly of the Beast, with us today.
Yes, so welcome. And so for anyone who's wondering, for the Philadelphia Latino Film Festival, you can check out Belly of the Beast, which is about the Central California's women's facility that has concealed the reproductive and human rights violations that had transpired behind its walls, and a courageous young woman who was involuntarily sterilized at the age of 24 while incarcerated at the facility teams up with a radical lawyer to stop these violations. So it's a documentary talking about not only this issue and some of the things that occurred to other women in the facility, but also the larger impact and the influences, like how we even got there, and what's still happening. It's definitely eye-opening to see how long it takes to get justice, how there are often times in this documentary where, despite we have a show where we're often talking about how horrible humans are and how terrible we are to each other, and that's just kind of what happens in society. But even with all of that, there were still times where I was just like, really? Like, this is what people this is really what we're going to do. So I kind of wanted to open up, the first question of just, how did you first hear about what was happening, and how you were connected specifically to this story?
So I was connected through the director, Erica. She first found out about the work of Cynthia Chandler, and that's how she got involved. She is a Jewish woman, and, she immediately, when she heard about this issue of people being sterilized, what pops into her head is eugenics, which absolutely is something, something that I like to talk about in regard to eugenics in this country, especially as somebody who lives in California, is that, eugenics and eugenic practices, we think of Nazi Germany, but those practices were actually exported from California by Hitler to Nazi Germany. So eugenics is something that, we like to put elsewhere in America. You know,
Mm-hmm.
that's something that happens elsewhere, but in reality, like those origins are here, and they're in our systems still. And you know, I think that that's one thing that we need to reckon with as a country. I mean, it's why we're seeing so many other, you know, systemic issues in, you know, based on race in our country. You know, so I think because I think, you know, in the United States, we talk a lot about racism, you know, however, we may or may not be talking about those things, but we also aren't, you know, I think even that as a root cause, like we need to get to the idea of eugenics, which is, you know, a very root cause. And then just one thing that I wanted to I guess respond to that you had said is how long it takes to get justice. You know, and Kelly does not consider herself to have justice yet. Well, there's a bill in California that's moving its way through legislation, AB 1007, and it just passed the Appropriations Committee, which is further than it's ever gotten before. So, you know, hopefully we're on a path to something for reparations for these people who have survived these horrific things. But yeah, I just wanted to bring that up at the top.
Yeah. There's definitely at the end of it, there is that conversation, and there's a quote by Kelly that says, you know, this is only the beginning. And, you know, she mentions that this isn't her happy ending, right? Like, and she's like, after all of this, I deserve a happy ending. And that really, you know, struck me because the whole film is really just like how much time it took to just get to the little bit of progress that we got, and all of these different roadblocks that are there. And speaking on like the eugenics issue, right? A lot of the times we think of these as like, you know, solo incidents, right? It's like, this is like, this is one little blip in history, or, you know, this is just California, right? And it's like not acknowledging. Apple. Yeah, right. Exactly. The bad apple. And, you know, like, and the fact that oftentimes we're covering up history, even just thinking of the awful forced sterilization of Puerto Rican women because they didn't, you know, understand English and didn't know what they were signing for. It's like that was happening. People aren't even talking about that either. So it's I think having that in the documentary, so it's not just like, okay, here's the one incident, but to kind of have that more umbrella like explanation of like, no, this is like institutional. Like this is a part of the system that we have to address on a larger scale.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's one thing that the whole team is really concerned comes through. So it's really great to hear that that's something that you take away from it.
Yeah. Kat, you had something specifically about eugenics in Nazi Germany, because that part really
I did.
Yeah, struck us, like, for sure.
Yeah, it was. I think it's something that's like I knew, but it hit especially hard seeing it like said again. And then also it's just, as you said, like it's something that people think is like, oh, that was Nazi Germany, where it's like they got the framework from here. And I think how society generally does seem to cover up various aspects of history or make it seem like it was worth happening because of capitalism. And I guess my question is like, how do we build a more accountable society? How do we shine light on these things and make people look at it for what it is? And I guess like find empathy in that, because I feel like even when looking at like the comments that people had in response when they found out, like on Twitter, it was like there was no empathy there. There was no kindness or even just like understanding. It was really gross. And I guess it's like, how do we build a more accountable society? I don't know if that's something that we can figure out today, obviously, but it was a question that came to my mind.
I think it's a good thing to, you know, be asking the question. And I think, you know, I think the only way we build empathy is with empathy. So, I mean, I think, and this is maybe something I've never said before in regards to this film, but, you know, I think that the tendency to not have empathy and to be cruel, when confronted with these realities, may, I guess in the best way, may come from a place of disgust or not being able to process it. So, maybe the first stage is denial.
Yeah.
And wanting to sweep it away because you don't want to deal with it, right? So I don't know. I think maybe in some sense that's the first step, is figuring out how do we, I guess, have empathy for people who don't want to have empathy. I don't know if that's okay, but
yeah.
No, I think I understand, because in that, so the scene that Kat is speaking about is, there's this part of this documentary where the truth kind of comes out, and the people's response to it was really surprising to me. Like, when I look back, I'm like, okay, yeah, we've been fed a specific rhetoric. We've had, specific stories that are out there, like the, welfare queen, or any of those kinds of dialogues that have just been a part of, like, the culture and just the understanding. But to see like that vitriol in those people who see them as less than people, and like, because it's so clear when you're watching to be like, of course you want justice, of course this is wrong, like, this hurts me as a woman to see. And then to see those responses from also women too on there, just being like, well, what do you expect? But the initial response is surprise, but then it's like, when you're really sitting there, it's more of like, we need to reshape the narratives that people are hearing about. Like, we need to encourage literacy, like media literacy, right? Like, think about what it is that you're ingesting, what you're watching, what you're learning from. Ask those specific questions of who is writing this, what do they want me to think and feel and do, and that's just not something that comes with the American people. Like, we just don't have that. And so I understand that idea of you kind of have to understand that they have been, fed something else, right? Like, it's not going to come that natural. So I agree that there is, like, to some degree, in empathy for those who might not have empathy because they just don't know. Like, they don't actually, like, know that what they're thinking is wrong. And one of the questions that I had, because this is a very heavy piece. There are times where you feel a little hopeful, but it is very, like, it feels a little bleak, because, like you said, there isn't a happy ending, right? It's something we're still fighting for. It's still something that is grotesque to know has been experienced, and not even just here, all over. So one of the things I wanted to ask was, during the production and kind of following this story, knowing what it is, it requires a lot of emotional labor to tackle this. And so how do you cope with that? Like, you and your team, how are you getting through that? What gets you kind of powered through so that you can get to the end and to make something like this to educate others?
Yeah, yes. It's a lot. I think every member of the team has a different, strategy, and, obviously self-care, all of those things, therapy, but also, just, we still have the privilege to be telling the story, not living it, right? I think that's one thing that always comes back, and, like, we have the privilege to tell the story. And so and it's important that a story like this gets told, because how else do you build, how you have to see people like this. You have to be, have opportunities to have people who have experienced this type of thing humanized to you if you don't have those opportunities. And a film like this that has that approach and has that, deals with so much care, like the care that Erica took for building her relationship with Kelly, the trust that Kelly put with Erica to tell this story, was immense. And she, that was a relationship that took a long time to build. And so, I think that's part of the process as well, right? To, you're accountable. That's one thing that I feel like I'm learning more and more about media work. You're accountable in deeper ways that I think I've always, wanted to be accountable and care for stories when you're telling them. But I think there's so many, when you're actually doing it and in it, there's a lot of things that you learn about what that means to be accountable to someone. And with a story that's this nuanced, misrepresented, there's obviously elements of like muckraking, like investigative journalism. So people actively trying to not have you tell this story, not have access to the pieces of information that you need to tell a story like this, and then even support of, this is not a story that is an instant thumbs up for a lot of places, so there's those challenges as well as a filmmaker. There's a lot of challenges, and I don't know, I guess, Erica built a really great team around her. A production is just a force of nature as far as, her commitment and to this and to the outreach behind it.
Mm-hmm. And I think to, some degree, when you have a documentary like this and you are, like you said, like, it's not that thumbs up, or like not, people aren't running to, be like, oh, I want to, sit here and be really sad, or even some people who might, disagree or agree with the people online at that part of the story. I feel like that part of that is kind of validating and like, okay, we are clearly doing something right if it's getting even a remote pushback, because it's causing a conversation, it's stirring up a dialogue, it's getting people to be like, wait a second, what else don't we know? If this was happening for so long, and to also question the way that people are reacting to it. When we covered in a previous episode population control, we talked about China's one-child policy, and that documentary was like banned in China and in other Asian countries because it was like, no, we don't want to talk about these issues. And so, I appreciate having these tough conversations and having a documentary that is addressing those and making people feel uncomfortable, because that's the only way we can then do something about it. Like, you have to feel uncomfortable to then realize that this is wrong and want to fix it.
Totally. Transformative pain. It's good. It's great.
Something else that we noticed throughout is that someone in the documentary said inmates become numbers. They don't get names. That's something that makes it easier to abuse them. And America has a long history of dehumanizing people to validate oppression. I guess it's like, how can we create more human-minded spaces instead of money-minded spaces? I guess like something that was also coming to my mind while we were talking is how we always talk about the bad apples. How do we shift the perspective from the apples to the tree? And also recognize that like the apples are playing a part, I guess, if that makes sense.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I feel hopeful that, with the momentum that Black Lives Matter was gaining, it has gained, hopefully sustaining in a sustaining way. And people are talking about prison abolition in a way that, when we started this film, that was insane. Right. I mean, people would just be like, what are you even talking about? I mean, honestly, even me, I was educated on what that is through this film, through the making of this film. I mean, and it wasn't something that I necessarily resisted. But once I was, educated, I was like, oh, no, that all makes sense. I hear what you're saying. But, it is in a world, I'm specifically talking about, obviously, the system of incarceration in this country as a system that is, needs reform. Mm-hmm. But when you're thinking specifically of that system, it's like, some people are like, well, what will we do without it? It keeps us safe, and there's, it's like there's a threat of fear, of anarchy, of like, well, what will we do with our most dangerous people if we don't have this net to catch them? Mm-hmm. But it's not acknowledging that net, if you're talking about it as like a safety net.
Mm-hmm.
It's like what's that kind of net that takes all the other like fish other than the tuna, like a drag net, right?
Yeah.
There's so much collateral damage, and if it doesn't affect you, if it doesn't affect your community, this system of incarceration, and if it's only locking up people that and breaking up families and injuring people that you don't know and don't particularly care about or have an inherent bias against, of course you're going to be like, I like that thing. That's great. When somebody's barbecuing outside my house, I can call someone.
Yeah. Yeah. It caters to a specific group of people, and they are the ones benefiting from it. So why would you want to lose that?
And I feel like that last thing that I said is a little bit trivializing. Obviously there's serious issues, so I don't necessarily want to trivialize the need for people to feel safe in their communities.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone, and that's everyone, right? So I think policing is something that makes some people feel safe, but and everyone has a right to feel safe. But we just need to, again, like dig deeper into why is it that some communities don't feel safe in those same systems?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think it is a matter of perspective too, and thinking of the documentary in one just conversation where, they're presenting what was happening, and then that their opposition was like the gynecologists being like, oh, cool. Like when we do it, we get all the, we check 10 times to make sure you're doing it. Like clearly from these testimonies, like that's not what is happening in there. So I think there's just misinformation. And so documentaries like this help to inform people on what is actually happening. Like in, perfect society, we would be asking 10 times. In perfect society, like we totally understand the necessity for care to be accessible in these facilities, and it's a valid, question to bring up of like, what happens if someone actually needs this procedure? Now it's forbidden, like, to be that extreme. But it's also like, okay, but you got to hear us out as well, that clearly it's not working in this system. And that, like, I do really appreciate like having those conversations within the piece too, of like, that it's not black and white, right? Like there's so much depth and obstacles and complications that go into it to consider. In the end, kind of seeing how, despite all of that evidence and some of those conversations, there's still like, one person interviewed in there that agrees with what was happening, like to some extent, saying, it is, beneficial financially to do these things, like despite having all of this information, just still side with what is obviously wrong. It kind of like drove home that thing of like, this isn't the end. We still have so much work to do. And so, my question for anyone who's watching this is, what you're hoping people leave with after watching this, and what are the next steps? Like, what do we need to do now?
I think one thing, obviously, we're definitely supporting the reparations bill in California. So AB 1007, so 1007 in California. So, you can go to Belly of the Beast film.com and check out that. We're helping campaign, making calls and supporting that effort for people to get, reparations for the abuses that they suffered. But even that's not the end, right? I mean, that would be a historic new thing that has been tried in the past. And it would be amazing if we can help be a part of that. But I think, just continuing to learn, if like prison abolition is something that is new to you or is, uncomfortable. I think continuing to learn more and see how defunding those kind of systems beneficial to all of us. I think that's the thing that's really important, and we want people to take away from the film. Yeah, and then also, I think, you know, in the spirit of like talking about compassion, you know, like these are things that sometimes you might need more than one attempt at, right? So, you know, if you say like, I've looked into that, I don't understand, or I don't, you know, like maybe try again from some other way, you know, don't just write it off, even if it's, you know, I think that's one thing where it's like, oh, prison abolition, no, you know, and maybe you're not even reading anything. So, you know, if you're listening to this and you can recognize that in yourself, that you're just saying no, but not actually like looking into what it might mean in practice, or be, you know, and that's the thing is you can become involved in how that practice would look potentially, you know, so I don't know, like, just please have an open mind.
Yeah, no, that's fair and valid.
I guess so for like people who are trying to, so it's great that California is starting to make progress, but obviously this is the tip of the iceberg in terms of that this is happening likely in other prison systems and other states and other places as well. Do you have any advice for filmmakers, I guess, who would maybe be approaching these topics and trying to tell similar stories in different locations?
That's a question that we have not gotten, and it's a great question. You know, I think, and it absolutely is happening. We've had, through this film, we've had people, you know, start to suspect that something like this has happened to them, or confirm, like felt validated that this has happened to them. We've actually had people say that they've witnessed this type of thing continuing. So those are, you know, that's all very shocking. It's not shocking. You know, it's terrible, I guess is what it is. But yes, so these things are still happening. But for filmmakers, I think it's important when dealing with people who have trauma of any sort, especially, you know, very deep, multi-traumatic kind of experiences, you know, that's something that you need to educate yourself on, is how to be, you know, trauma informed, you know, and that's interview techniques, that's relationship building. And then, you know, always, I think, you know, acknowledging the power dynamic between you as a filmmaker and especially people who are incarcerated, centered and leading whatever it is that you're doing. You're not putting, you know, you can't put timeline, you can't put those things on. You have to be ready when the person whose story you're telling is ready in this kind of situation.
Being flexible and
essentially not making a spectacle out of it because it's like a film, but it's also something that's like very real and that people have experienced extreme trauma through. Making sure that you're being kind to their experience and not making it like just a show, I guess is what you're saying. Yeah.
And yes. Or don't do it, because it takes, you know, that's an option. Like, think about it. You need to tell this story, and why? And why is it you?
Yeah, that's a very important, and asking those media literacy questions about yourself too, right? Like, what do you want people to leave with? How do you contribute to that issue? Like, are you helping in any way? Are you hindering it with this creation? So yeah, those are like fundamental questions that should definitely be asked. I agree.
Yeah. And reciprocity too is like a thing that I think needs to be pushed further. You know, what does that look like in documentary filmmaking?
Yeah, I agree. If people are looking for more information and want to follow, where can they find that?
So it's bellyofthebeastfilm.com is the website, and Belly of the Beast Film on Facebook and on Instagram as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Oh, and then also, I want to shout out Kelly's organization, Back to Basics, where she's in the community and doing work, great work. She did like a food distribution yesterday.
Oh, nice. Awesome. Thank you. And Yeah, so thank you so much for chatting with us and kind of dissecting this film. We really appreciated it. And for anyone who's watching for the Philadelphia Latino Film Festival, I hope you're enjoying it as well. And you check out these resources so we can continue the progress. And because the battle is not over, this is just the start. And we would like to have Kelly have that happy ending, or what she feels is a happy ending, for sure.
Yes. Thank you so much. This has been really great.